Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Rutan from startups.com, joined as always by my friend, the founder and CEO of startups.com, Wil Schroter. Wil, we know lots and lots and lots of founders, and there's this funny thing that happens at some point, which is that sometimes between startups or after our first startup, we stop being in a startup for a while. All right. And there's this notion somehow within some of the population that it's this transitive, temporary kind of title. All right. It's like I'm the GM of a Taco Bell one day and then I get fired the next day because we left the meat out. And now I'm no longer the GM of a Taco Bell.
Left the meat out.
So
that's awesome.
The same thing doesn't seem to apply here. I mean, certainly you and I know plenty of people who have been founders and they may not be actively in a startup right now. That's kind of like saying once your kids leave the house, you're no longer a parent. Or if you decided to sell your car and ride a bike, you're no longer a driver, right? You still have this capability and really, I think the mindset and the kind of the emotional set and the psychological set that comes with being a founder, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because we have, these founder groups that we put together. There's these 8-person groups, and we've done it for years. I mean, we've done it for 20 years. But one of the things is that people coming in and out of startups. So people will be in the group as a founder group, and they're there because they want to talk about their startup. It makes total sense. That's why you're there. But then, they either sell the startup, they shutter the startup, whatever. Their entity goes away.
Yeah.
Invariably, it sparks the conversation with us, which is, hey, am I still a founder? Should I be in this group anymore? And it's incredulous to us because we look at it and we're like, yeah, of course you are, right? But I don't think this topic has been really well discussed or well defined. So I don't think people have a framework for it. So the TLDR here is, yes, you're a founder for life. But I think this episode, we're going to talk about why the understanding and kind of framework for what it means to be a founder kind of sticks with you, whether you like it or not. and it's not something that we can easily just dismiss. Again, it's not like I'm no longer the GM of Taco Bell. Being a founder is kind of like your DNA. It's who you are. And so I think it sticks with you forever. And so I think we should talk about that today.
Agree. Yeah, I think the summit, it's like the startups are temporary, right? In a lot of cases. Well, in most cases, right? Something's going to happen to it, right? But being a founder is not, right? And I think that this notion of what happens when I'm in that in-between or even after state, you may never do another startup again. You're still a founder. And I would argue, to the point around, we do see this. People are like, well, my startup's shutting down. Should I no longer participate in the group? Quite the opposite, friend. You have some of the most amazing and hard-earned lessons that any founder can go through.
100%.
So in as much as this is a permanent state, you're a founder. You got the scarlet letter, right? There's an F. A lot of founders, once they've had that first failure, they think they're permanently branded with 2 Fs now. They're the failed founder. It's just not the case, right? You never know what's going to happen next. But certainly there's a ton of wisdom to be shared from that point.
As you know, I'm a carpenter. And when I say that, people think that must be my profession. And so when I tell people who don't know what I do, and I say I'm a carpenter, they just assume that kind of makes sense. So people get paid for. Why would you say that unless that was actually your job? But it's not my job. I just happen to be a carpenter. I spend a lot of time building stuff, right? And I love it. And I'm passionate about it. If someone pays me for it, in other words, if it turns into a job, I don't all of a sudden become more skilled.
Now,
I'm the same person. I'm a carpenter whether you pay me or not.
Exactly.
Same goes for so many professions. You mentioned parent. I thought that was genius. The same goes for an artist. Whether I just made an album a year ago doesn't make me any more or less an artist. I'm still an artist either way. That just happens to be the product of what I do. So I think part of the identity we tend to feel comes from whether or not I either do it professionally, actively, or successfully. Now here's where that gets interesting.
There'd be a lot less musicians in the world if that was a requirement.
12.
The success piece, yeah.
Yeah. And so let's take somebody like Bill Gates. Bill Gates hasn't been active at Microsoft for 15 years, right? I mean, he's been long since gone. But everyone considers him technically co-founder of Microsoft. But the reason people tend to give him that title forever is because it went well.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So everyone's perfectly okay with saying Bill Gates is a founder. But if you and I build something and it runs for a year and a half and it fails, we feel like we're not founders anymore, right? Yeah, I used to be a founder of something, right? But I'm no longer a founder. And what I'm saying is, I don't think success or failure is actually the determining factor. No different than if I lose a football game, I'm not an athlete or a player anymore. I just lost that game.
Yep. I lost last night. I'm very much still a player, right? Like I am still very much trying to be a player.
Right.
And we took a bad beating last night. But I'll go back out and play again, right? I'm that dumb.
Right. But you don't need to win games to consider yourself a soccer player.
No, I don't. It helps. I enjoy it.
There's that part. But seriously, like I think when people look at being a founder, they look at it as something that it only exists, again, if I'm successful. So Bill Gates can say I'm the founder of something because it was Microsoft. And you might look at it and say, well, why would I want to say I was the founder of something that didn't work? Well, guess what? Most stuff doesn't work.
Right, exactly.
Again, that's like saying I'm only an athlete that wins games. Well, most games get lost, right? For most athletes, right? That's kind of the way it goes. And a lot of people just don't quite understand that. I don't think success is the metric of being a founder or maintaining your title, so to speak.
Correct. Yeah. It's also not like your LinkedIn title, right? I think a lot of people think, right, if I'm not actively doing this right in this moment, it just goes away. It just doesn't, right? Being a founder isn't a job title, right? We've talked about this before, actually. It's the most nondescript job title ever. It gives you a sense for where that person is and sort of the mindset. It tells you absolutely nothing about what that person does, right? If you're the CEO of a publicly traded company, we have a fairly good understanding of what you're doing. If you're the GM of a Taco Bell, we know exactly what you're doing, which is ruining food on a regular basis. The founder title isn't really a title, right? It's more of an ethos, right? It's our reason for being. It's the thing that we are, not the thing that we do.
You know, somebody actually just had like a whole long blog post about this. It was Jason Fried from Basecamp. He was talking about how this concept of founder and CEO is kind of like an awkward thing and it's not really a thing. And the way he defined a founder, he said the founder is the kind of person that's always pushing the envelope and taking huge risks, where the CEO is more risk adverse, et cetera. And I pushed back on that. And I said, honestly, I don't think a lot of CEOs would agree with you on that. I would say like there's plenty of CEOs that push the envelope, et cetera. I think Jason's got a fairly myopic view of what it means to be a founder, probably shaped by how he thinks about being a founder.
Right.
But I would agree with the part where being a founder isn't always necessarily a job. It's kind of a status, right? Like in my mind, I look at the founder as someone who creates something. Again, literally the title, suggests as much, but someone who's creating something. Now, sometimes people maintain the title, like in other words, somebody's just the founder and somebody else is the CEO, et cetera, and they give them some role, but it's a totally amorphous title because it's not really a job.
No,
and again, I want to stick on that. Being a founder isn't a job, which means if you no longer have that company, you didn't lose the title.
Right.
Back to your GM Taco Bell analogy, right? It's not something you can lose. You were the creator, a parent. Whether your kid talks to you or not, you're still their parent. You still made them whether you did a shitty job as a parent or not. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's really interesting. I'd be curious, going back to the Jason Fried example, I'd be curious to know how many of those folks he was looking at. Was he drawing a strong distinction between people who had never been a founder and were a CEO in terms of like that risk aversion? Or was he talking about people who were founders who then maybe not even in that business, but then went on to be a CEO? Because I can think of plenty of examples where there does seem to be some truth to what he's saying, but it's certainly not. There's still a lot of variability in it.
Yeah, it didn't feel like a very scientific analysis on his part.
Not at all.
I think it's kind of how he felt, and he was writing it as such, which is fair. That's what Twitter's for. But I do think that being a founder is kind of like how we're built. It's in our DNA.
For sure. Yeah, I would say founder, right? Yeah, CEO is a job. Founder is a condition, right? Sometimes a blessing, sometimes a curse, right?
It's
a condition.
Founder is a condition.
Yep.
I see it now, like whenever I talk to founders and I always talk to them their backstory. And I say, tell me a little bit about kind of how you got started in life, whatever. Everyone has, as funny as it is, no matter how different their stories are in life, they always kind of start the same. Everyone sold candy. I don't know why candy is like this gateway drug to entrepreneurship, but like 9 times out of 10, someone had a candy business, where they sold something. I know I did. That was like my big thing.
I was close. Mine was a lemonade wagon, but it's
yeah, there it is. Yeah. You're still peddling sugar.
Yep.
And so what was interesting to me is there's just certain folks, the people that we talk to every day, that are just built this way. Like no one ever had to sit us down and say, you should consider being a founder.
Dude, quite the opposite. I had people trying to talk me out of it, like consistently. They're like, "Oh, you should go do an MBA. You should do that. You should do that." Right? And it was anything but like try to start your own thing. And look, it was the environment that they were in. Most of these were like academics who like the idea of going and building something brand new as opposed to just repeating things written in somebody else's book was terrifying. No offense to some of my lovely professors, and full offense to some of the others who were total shit.
Well, but my thing is, it's one of those things, it starts early. My point of bringing it up early is that you didn't have to be taught it. Like you started to become this person. In many ways, that people are athletes. They're just naturally athletes.
You just
or
see
they're
it
naturally
happening.
creative.
The way they move, the way they think, the way they react. Yep.
There's just something natural about them that kind of has this gear. And I think the same goes for founders. I know plenty of founders who started something a long time ago and haven't done anything since, as far as starting something. And now they're off, in the corporate world or something else, right? And they're fine with that. But the point is, you had to have had that DNA at some point to have started something to begin with. Going back to you had to have had the condition. A great parallel there are things like people who do things professionally for a minute, like an athlete or a musician, et cetera. Where a lot of people like in their 20s, were really into music and they were going to start a band and they thought they were going to get signed and do all this stuff. And it didn't work out that way. And now they're an attorney somewhere.
Well, it's the NCAA commercials, right? 98% of our student athletes go on to be anything but an athlete, right? Yeah. And they're still athletes, right? They're still athletes. Right. You can tell when you walk into that business where, like there's somebody you're like, I'm guessing you were a linebacker at some point in your life because you're built like a linebacker. If you're built like a linebacker, there's only one reason to have that build, and that's you were a linebacker, right? So you're still the athlete. You're also now doing something else.
Something that's really funny about everything we talk about here is that none of it is new. Everything you're dealing with right now has been done 1,000 times before you, which means the answer already exists. You may just not know it, but that's okay. That's kind of what we're here to do. We talk about this stuff on the show, but we actually solve these problems all day long at groups.startups.com. So if any of this sounds familiar, stop guessing about what to do. Let us just give you the answers to the test and be done with it.
You bet. In the same way, like, right now, you and I are building companies, right? If we go choose to do something else that doesn't take that away, we don't no longer have that ability.
God forbid, man.
Yeah. But I think that from a DNA standpoint, the reason founders like us, the reason that we connect with each other so well is because we have those default thoughts. The default thought of what if and why not.
Yeah, the default thoughts, and to your point, that kind of that common background. And again, that came from that common mindset and that gear that we have. But when you dig into everybody's backstory, there's so much overlap between it. You're like, we've known each other our whole lives and we just met, right? It's that same thing, right? It's going back to, and of course, that was driven by the mindset and by the inner workings of that human. But I think when you combine those things, which is that very similar experiential set and pathway, combined with that mentality and that desire to build and to understand and to break things and fix them and make stuff, there's just that instant camaraderie that I love in this space.
I think we see it. I think, Ryan, you and I are spoiled by it because we see this all the time. We see you entrepreneurial kind of founder mentality all the time. Most of the folks that we hire at startups.com have had a business. They've been CEO of something else at some point. No matter where they work in the organization, they've probably started their thing or have a side hustle going or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically our training program, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
Did you already start something? Cool. Then a huge chunk of what is the hardest part or maybe the impossible part to teach.
I think I shared this with you like on social media or something a really long time ago. I have a tracker of all the people that have ever worked with me, right? And I keep track of kind of where are they now. And I update it every few years because it's a lot of fun. And when I post it, it's over 100 people that have worked for some company that I've started over the past 30 years that are now CEOs of another company.
Yeah.
Right. Which is
fun.
Awesome. And countless founders within that. I say that because those people were founders all along. They came through one of these companies. They were inspired by something we did, and they activated their founder mentality.
Yeah, we've had a couple people that started with us as interns back in 2014, 2015, who then went on to found companies and are now running successful businesses. It's so fun to watch.
What's also fun to watch is most of our staff early on in like 2012, when we were first getting started, was all in Columbus, Ohio. Even you were in Columbus, Ohio at the time, right? We were all there. And so now that it's been like a decade since, if you run like a heat map of all the founders in Columbus now, at least half of them map back to some employment at some point in what we've done, which is really awesome, right? There's so much connectivity there. But the point is, they were always founders. They just happened to be working, at our company for one moment, in the same way that many of the founders that we have on staff now are still founders. They're just working here versus somewhere else.
Yeah, that's funny. It's funny to think about. There are people who are founders that don't know it yet, and there are people who are still founders who believe that they've lost that, right? And neither is true.
Correct. Not even a little bit. And again, the reason we're spoiled is because like when you and I work on a product idea or marketing idea, really anything, we have the advantage where we can hop into Slack and we can say, hey guys, what do you think about this?
Yep.
And every person on that Slack, having the founder mentality, has like a very kind of, I'm going to say gritty, and I mean this in the right way. Well, here's how we can do it faster, cheaper, more effectively, et cetera. And no one even like thinks twice about it. They're like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Let's go do that. Or people will take their own initiative, things like that. We are so spoiled by that because we have a whole organization of them. Then you drop one of them, one of these Navy SEALs, into traditional corporate, and their heads explode. One of my friends, he's in a founder group in Columbus. He sold his company, went to go work for a big corporate, and just emailed me a couple of days ago. He's like, I'm bored out of my mind already. It's been like 6 months, right? You got a great job, but he's like, I'm bored at a great company. He's like, I'm bored out of my mind already. Because when he's in big corporate, he doesn't know what to do with himself. He's like everyone just like takes weeks to do things that should take minutes.
Yeah. I find myself constantly leaning on various guardrails, keeping me from making progress.
It's unbelievable. And that's where you start to like remember that you are built very differently. The archetype of the founder does not fit well. I thought about this the other day. I've had very few jobs prior to being a founder, but I think I was fired from all of them. I think I may have just stuffed that in the back of my mind at some point. But when I went through it, I was like, no, I kind of was fired from all of them in some way, shape, or form. Like I was not meant to be an employee, which maybe I'm also a jerk, but whatever.
I remember that too. Then I think I've brought this up on the podcast before, which is like in the early stages of me declaring that I was an entrepreneur. When I finally felt comfortable doing that there was a lot of pushback and a lot of like, it was kind of like, I was unemployable. They weren't wrong. They were just wrong about the reason, right? It wasn't that I lacked drive, skill set, motivation, capability, or anything like that. It was like, I just didn't want to do it in that environment, right? Like I didn't like the rules of that particular game. I want to circle back to something you said, which was that, we are spoiled, and we are absolutely spoiled in so many ways. The thing that I try never to take for granted is what a benefit our customer base is, our friend group of founders is to us because of that power that it brings, right? To your point, we can jump in to not only our own internal Slack, we can go to our entire community of founders and ask questions and get amazing feedback, right? Real feedback and of course you can always ask your customers. Right, but go ahead, GM at Taco Bell. Ask your customers how what they would like to see from a product iteration perspective. I don't know, make it $1. Like, of course, every once in a while you'll get the guy who's like, well, what if you made a taco shell shaped waffle and then put chicken in it, and Taco Bell had chicken and waffles? That would be genius, right?
Okay, but that's let's stop right there. That is genius, Ryan.
Thank you. I suggested this to them via Twitter in 2015 when the chicken and waffles thing was hot. They didn't take me up on it.
Gotta love some chicken and waffles. So here's what I think though. While we can't take ourselves out of being that startup, founder archetype, we do have many startups though. Here's where I think it gets a little bit funky. And I think it throws founders specifically. They're thinking, well, my startup doesn't exist anymore. And it's like, right? And there will be another, and there'll be another. Now, if you've never done this before, if this is your first rodeo, the first time you've kind of been through the beginning and end of one, it feels like that must be it.
Yeah. Or why would I ever do this again? Right. That kind of thing, which then all of a sudden you forget. Right. And then you want to go back.
It's kind of funny because when I hear that story, and again, it's totally valid because it's the first time you've ever done it. Makes total sense. It reminds me of when I hear like a high school kid talk about the trials and tribulations of being a high school kid.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, oh, that girl won't talk to me. And so like my life is forever ruined, or that boy broke up with me. And so my life is forever ruined. And I'm like, oh my God, that's hilarious. Because yes, for where you are in life and for your set of experience, that actually is the most important thing that's ever happened to you, and singularly feels like it's going to define your whole life.
Yeah. And it's going to last forever. The feeling is going to last forever, right?
Correct. Right. If you're 30 years later It's almost hilarious how insignificant that moment is in the grand scheme of life, not by itself. Like, again, I'm not...
Especially if you can see those people on Facebook at this point, right?
That's so bad. So when we look at, hey, am I not a founder anymore? This didn't work out. And it's like, dude, you're going to do this like 5 more times. Not everybody will, right?
It's like riding a bike, right? Like, how many bikes did you have growing up, right? You keep getting on different bikes. Okay, it's not exactly like riding a bike. It's kind of like riding a bike down a mountain made of glass covered in 10W40 oil, right? But once you've done it, like, you know how to do it. You're not going to forget, right? That muscle's there and the desire's there, right? The want to create and build is always going to be there.
The way I look at it is, think of it as being an artist, right? Something I think people can appreciate, something being perennial, right? If I were to consider myself an artist, and I do consider myself a creator first and a founder second, but as a creator, I've created 9 companies, right? I might create more in the future. Who the hell knows, right? But either way, I'm still a founder. Like, I'm a founder, and that's what I do is I create companies. Maybe I take a few years off and I'm not doing one then. Maybe I take a decade off. Who knows? Who cares? Point is, the startups are what I create. Those are my albums, if you will. I continue to be an artist. I continue to make albums whenever the hell I feel like it, or not make albums. And if I stop making albums, I'm no longer not an artist. Like, Led Zeppelin doesn't become not Led Zeppelin because they haven't made an album recently, right? Like, they're still Led Zeppelin.
They're there.
It doesn't change, is my point.
I'm just having a hard time here because now, since you've said artist, all I can picture is like you doing your version of the Mona Lisa, but instead of looking like Da Vinci painted himself, it's that you painted yourself like the Mona Lisa. I can't shake the image.
I would be a sexy Mona Lisa. Let's call it what it is.
I'm going to have some AI art created later today that is you as the Mona Lisa. I will share it with the world.
Every time this AI art gets generated, I am next level terrified because I've yet to see any first pass that didn't make me cringe. But actually, that's part of the fun of it. But I think for all of our founders, all the people that we're reaching out to, the people that we're coaching, and look, we're going through some tough times. Right now, when we're recording this, we just entered kind of Q2 of 2023, and times are tough. Startups are failing left and right, but we don't have less founders. We have founders that may have folded a startup, and that's perfectly okay.
We have less active founders in an active startup, right? And I wouldn't even say less active founders. They may still be super active, but yeah, we have a lot of people whose startup just ceased to be in the way that it was. And now they're in some sort of a different state, but they're still founders.
Correct. And so your startup is a piece of you. It's what you create. It's kind of how you use your founder power. But the active nature of the startup, whether you've done it a long time ago or you just folded it recently, doesn't change who you are. You will be forever a founder because that's who you are. That is your DNA. That's what you're built to do. So when we look at this and we say, hey, I just wrapped up my last startup. The way Ryan and I look at it is, hey, that's great. That's your last album. Let's get to your next album. Let's focus on that because you're going to be a founder forever.
So in addition to all the stuff related to founder groups, you've also got full access to everything on startups.com. That includes all of our education tracks, which will be funding, customer acquisition, even how to manage your monthly financiers. There's so much stuff in there. All of our software, including BizPlan for putting together detailed business plans and financials, LaunchRock for attracting early customers, and of course, Fundable for attracting investment capital. When you log into the startups.com site, you'll find all of these resources available.